Immigration is the coming into a country of foreigners for the purpose of permanent residence. There are many motivations for immigration, both voluntary, such as better education and financial opportunities, and involuntary, such as persecution, prejudice, and war. Whether traveling across oceans or borders, migrants leave in search of improved living conditions, financial opportunities, and safety. In the wake of World War II, the 1951 Refugee Convention was put in place, defining the term refugee and outlining their rights as well as obligations of states to protect them. Although the convention has since been amended, the core principle, which asserts that a refugee should not be returned to a country where they face serious threat to their life or freedom, is still in place. This is now considered a rule of customary international law. In 2015, the Syrian refugee crisis began. Countries across the world have reacted differently to this influx of immigrants.
Asylum is a right in Germany and is granted to everyone who flees political persecution. These rights are protected in Clause 16A of their own constitution. However, there have been several amendments to these and other laws due to the current refugee crisis. On October 24, 2015, the Act on the Acceleration of Asylum Procedures entered into force. The Act amended several laws in order to accelerate the asylum process. On November 1, 2015, the Act to improve the housing, care and treatment of foreign minors and adolescents entered into force. Its goal was to improve the situation of young unaccompanied refugees and provide them with the appropriate care they needed to survive. Additionally, on February 3, 2016, the German government agreed on a set of stricter asylum measures, Asylum Package 2, which will now be debated by the German Bundestag. Germany's open border approach to immigration, and specifically asylum seekers, has resulted in the European giant being branded as the United States of America, having taken in over 1 million refugees in the last decade, has recently declared a record low unemployment rate at 3.9%, while countries such as the US, as Grania has been speaking about, are scrambling at borders debating who is to pick up the tab for a abundant wall.
In contrast to Germany, Norway, dealing with the influx of refugees in the current refugee crisis, elected a right-wing coalition which has introduced controversial new laws to curb immigration. In November, the majority of parties in Norway's parliament agreed to amend the Immigration Act 2008 on the entry of foreign nationals into the country for the purpose of having stricter control on the entrance and exits of foreign nationals. Norway no longer requires that a country accept and process asylum applications to be considered a safe third country. The change meant that Russia was deemed safe to receive asylum seekers, and subsequently people were forced to return there. Norway's refugee policy is now one of the strictest in Europe. It will now be possible to refuse entry to asylum seekers at the borders with other Nordic countries during a crisis with an excessive amount of arrivals due to these implemented provisions. It has been criticised heavily by the Norwegian Lawyers Association as a direct violation of Norway's international obligations. Human Rights Watch warned of a lack of assurance from Russian authorities that those sent back would be given a fair hearing. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees strongly disputes the amendment.
The current act governing the refugees in the United States is the United States Refugee Act 1980. It was completed on 3rd March 1980, signed into law by President Carter on the 17th, and became in force on the 1st of April 1980. Title 4 of the original act was amended and created the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is responsible for administering and funding domestic resettlement in the United States. They must consult with local and state governments for the distribution of refugees and for sponsorship, for grants that they must create for the refugees as part of their job. Each year, the President of the United States sits down with Congress and they discuss the current seating for refugees in the United States. In 2016, it was 85,000 refugees to be admitted each year, but that could all change now with the coming of President Trump.
President Trump has been attempting to use executive orders to protect the United States of America. An executive order is a written order which is issued by the President of the federal government, which does not require approval from Congress. Article 2 of the US Constitution states that the executive power shall be vested in the President of the United States of America. This gives the President authority to issue these orders. The main executive power that Trump has made in relation to refugees is the Executive Order 13769, which is titled Protecting the Nation from Foreign Terrorist Entry into the United States. Main aspects of this executive order are: a lower number of refugees were admitted into the United States in 2017. Secondly, The US Refugee Administration's program has been suspended for 120 days. And thirdly, suspended entry of Syrian refugees indefinitely. Almost 50 cases were filed in the federal courts against this. The courts granted temporary relief in the form of a temporary restraining order, which bars the enforcement of major parts of this executive order.
Because of EU procession requirements, Turkey must bring its legislation in line with that of the European Union, including on asylum. In 2005, the government adopted the Action Plan on Asylum and Migration, which laid out a timetable of steps required for Turkey to bring its national legislation in line with EU directives on asylum. To this end, the Law on Foreigners of International Protection was adopted by Parliament in 2013. This law introduced landmark reforms that provide Turkey with an efficient and fairer system, emphasises treating asylum seekers in accordance with international norms. Nevertheless, Turkey continues to issue non-European refugees a temporary protection status that precludes permanent settlement in Turkey, a legal framework dating back to the more draconian 1994 Regulation on Asylum. Due to this outdated policy, Syrian refugees face years of uncertainty as the Syrian conflict drags ever on.
Alongside the LFIP, a new temporary protection regulation that came into effect in October 2014, the new TP regulation sets out specific provisions for registration and documentation procedures. It also provides refugees with the right to a lawful stay in the country until safe return conditions are established in Syria, and grant access to social benefit and services such as health and education. Psychological and social support and rehabilitation services are prioritised for groups with special needs such as children, women and the elderly. While Turkey's open door policy has been universally praised, as have the high standards of its refugee camps, it has also received criticism for legal uncertainties and administrative drawbacks. The EU heads of state forged a refugee deal with Turkey on March 2014. The agreement aims to address the overwhelming flow of smuggled migrants by allowing Greece to return to Turkey, arriving after March 20th. In exchange, EU member states will increase resettlement of Syrian refugees residing in Turkey, accelerate visa liberalisation for Turkish nationals, and boost existing financial support for Turkey's refugee population.
The Asylum Act of 1998 regulates the granting of asylum and legal status of refugees in Switzerland and their return. The decision of granting an application for asylum is made by the Secretariat for Migration, or the SEM. The SEM also regulates removal of an applicant believed to be harmful to the state. There is a screening process after submission of application. Applicants are allocated to centres by the SEM through a quota system. SEMs take their results and process it. If approved, applicants receive temporary residence permits.
However, as what Eric said, there's been mass discontent towards this. On the 16th of December 2016, Parliament passed a balanced immigration law. This was a federal action for foreign nationals. It was in turn put in place to curb immigration and remain in the hope that it could remain in the single EU market. However, during February 2014, a referendum was held and 56.6% of the vote was in favour of renegotiating on the EU-Swiss agreement on the free movement of persons. Under this agreement ratified in 2002, one of the main points was in regards to Article 1, which it would give objectives for housing immigrants of foreign refugee status. However, the EU reacted. The General Affairs Council meeting stated that free movement of persons is a fundamental pillar of EU policy, further renouncing the amendment of the Free Movement Act that would undermine the core of EU-Swiss relations and would exclude the Swiss from the single market. This, in turn, the fear was it would create guillotine clauses. However, a compromise was reached. The Swiss were to avoid mentioning the implementation of quotas on immigrants, instead prioritising Swiss job seekers over immigration.
In conclusion, all countries were affected by the Syrian refugee crisis, which began the summer of 2015. We examined the disparate countries that have been touched by this, and we can see that all countries reacted differently, which can be seen in the refugee legislation laws. Germany welcomed the refugees with open arms. Switzerland have been coerced by the EU refugee law to respond more welcoming than they would have alone. Turkey's suppression of the EU resulted in welcoming refugees,
but they have legal uncertainties. Norway opened its arms, then implemented harsh refugee laws. The US funded and administrated federal programs for domestic resettlements and assistance for refugees.